Why does the US not have the support of the Middle East in the Russia-Ukraine war? The silence of many Middle Eastern countries is like a bucket of cold water poured on US efforts to mobilize allies and partners. Partners support Ukraine. The US and the European Union, EU, want Saudi Arabia to pump more oil into the market, while the United Arab Emirates, UAE, stops helping Russian oligarchs avoid sanctions imposed by the West. But these countries still have not made any movement. Immediately after Russia launched its military campaign in Ukraine, U.S. officials reportedly tried to arrange a phone call between U.S. President Joe Biden and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. But the UAE rejected this proposal. Afterwards, Mr. Mohammed bin Salman had a conversation with Russian President Putin. This is the latest example in the cold period in relations between the United States and some of the leading oil exporting countries in the Middle East. Previously, President Biden called Saudi Arabia a rejected country and announced that he would punish the country for its involvement in the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. The Middle East feels abandoned. The Russia-Ukraine war made the U.S. realize that they need to strengthen relations with Saudi Arabia and other countries in the Middle East once again. The US and Europe want their partners in the Middle East to pump more oil into the market to lower global energy prices as well as support a UN resolution opposing Russia's attack on Ukraine and supporting sanctions. Punish Russia. But the Middle East has not made any commitments. Oil nations such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE still adhere to limits on crude oil output according to the agreement approved by the OPEC Plus group. They are also concerned that increasing oil production will cause crude oil prices to decrease and affect the revenue of producers. While many countries tighten sanctions on Russia, the UAE welcomes Russian tycoons, allowing them to transfer assets from Europe to Dubai. Other countries in the region, such as Iraq, Jordan, and Israel, have refused to vote against Russia at the United Nations Security Council. So, what makes America, a country with great influence in the Middle East for decades, unable to convince regional allies and partners to take their side in the Ukraine conflict? Since the end of World War II, Washington has traded military guarantees for regional energy security. However, when the U.S. began to exploit its own oil domestically since 2019, the country exported more petroleum than it imported, so the role of oil producers in the Middle East for the U.S. was less. More important. A report by the European Council on Foreign Relations, ECFR, released last April pointed out that the US remains the dominant security guarantor and arms exporter in the region. Washington has many large military bases throughout the Middle East, with approximately 45,000 to 60,000 personnel. But the country's military presence in the region is dwindling, and that creates opportunities for other countries to fill the void, ECFR noted. Mr. Aaron D. Miller, senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace said, over the past 20 years, although the U.S. has not completely withdrawn from the region, its priorities have changed. Hope to mend the relationship. Expert Aaron D. Miller said that the Middle East is still one of the priorities in U.S. foreign policy, but its role is no longer as important as before. In that context, partners in the region seem to sense that the security sponsor, a familiar customer, is paying less attention to them. Therefore, they sought to reach out to other parties. China is the world's largest oil importer. In 2020, 47% of crude oil imported into the country came from the Middle East. Saudi Arabia tops the list of countries selling the most crude oil to China. The Asian nation has also worked to strengthen its ties with the Middle East, such as assisting Saudi Arabia in developing ballistic missiles, acquiring Iraqi oil production facilities, and investing in Iraq's infrastructure. Bilal Saab, director of the Defense and Security Program at the Middle East Institute in Washington, noted, Middle Eastern countries also have their own interests and the United States is not the only player in this playing field. They have other options. Although this option may not be as good as the US, it is always available. However, as the Russia-Ukraine conflict continues and the global economic situation worsens, Partly due to rising gasoline prices, the United States is trying to regain ground it has lost to other parties, such as China, Russia. Last May, a high-level delegation led by U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris visited the UAE and met with President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. This week, U.S. media reported that the U.S. President will visit Saudi Arabia in mid-July to meet Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, something that Mr. Biden has always hesitated to do in the past. Many experts believe that in order to convince Middle Eastern countries to stand on the U.S. side in supporting Ukraine and punishing Russia, Washington needs to make mutually beneficial cooperation proposals. Analyst Bilal Saab emphasized, one of the potential areas of cooperation is the development of air and missile defense systems. This is what countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE need to deal with missile attacks from Houthi forces in Yemen that have seriously disrupted Saudi Arabia's oil exploitation. But if they want to buy missiles from other countries or develop ballistic missiles with China's help, the proposal that the US has proposed may be useless, Mr. Bilal Saab noted. Hong on/vov.vn, Summary.